transfer the control over to Mike. You are the presenter now.
So important. Hopefully, have I become unmuted at this time?
You are muted, Mike. I can hear you. Thank you.
Very good.
Now, you know share, right? Go to the share.
Let's see. Here, share my screen. Enter 2. I can now get this out of the way and hopefully.
Fantastic.
See the screen okay? We good?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I see recorded, so everything I say is again a court of law, and I'm prepared to defend myself, so that's great. Thank you for the action, and I'm looking forward to the presentation today. I actually sat in on the last one. I really enjoyed it about the dating and segmentation and how that works. The presentation that I'm going to be giving today is going to be a little bit more high level than it's going to be more as you noted in the introduction about how we can defend that we're creating value for members, because I really think that's how we operate as credit unions, what we're really trying to get accomplished. So I'm going to start out talking at a philosophical level, but then I will boil it down to specific granularity, literally showing you how you could do that in your organization. So without any further ado, let's just go ahead and hop into things. Said the agenda, we're going to start kind of wide and get narrow. The thing that I see is credit unions, we're very well intended, but sometimes our focus gets a little misguided, so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about a philosophy or an ethos that really supports our mission and vision, how we should operate in a member-friendly manner, and then how we can actually do that, literally a framework, and I'm going to wrap up with a couple of examples. Very about myself, I know we covered this real quickly. 5 years with Deloitte. I've been out here on my own for the past 18 years. About half my clients I work with in financial institutions is banks, and the other side is with credit unions. I think that gives me a unique perspective, and that's always kind of been my challenge, is trying to say, okay, as credit unions, how do we look at shareholders like stockholders, and how do we benefit them as much as we can? I've done some work with filing, and I also put my money where my mouth is, being a bank investor as well, too. So let's start with the cooperative riddle. Here's the dilemma. If we're a bank, it would be easy to maximize return over the long haul. It'd be to maximize the return to shareholders or stockholders, if you will. So that's very easy to define focus. The problem is, credit unions, we really have what we call a dual mandate. On one, examiners would love us to have a lot of capital. They're really concerned about us adequately capitalized. And if we were to follow down that track, if that was our sole focus, then the goal would be to maximize rate of return on assets, to build up a big pile of capital. That would make the examiners happy. Unfortunately, that's not why we exist. The cooperative, we exist to provide benefit to members, which is diametrically opposed to maximizing ROA. It's the goal to minimize ROA the least amount possible so that we can give the members. So the challenge really becomes is where do we operate on spectrum, and the knowledge base that we come from as individuals and our experiences and our management team comes from and our board of directors comes from is all the board on the spectrum. There'll be people that think the maximize ROA path is the best, others the minimize ROA path. So how can we find our way and galvanize upon something that's more common? So I'm going to talk really quickly about what I call the good intentions but the misguided focus. I go to a lot of conferences. I'm asked to speak and write many times, and I will meet board members and see leadership team members. And usually the first thing out of their mouth, other than the credit union that they work for, is the next thing that they'll tell me is what their return on assets was last year. And they'll be so excited as they're sharing that with me, almost like they want me to give them a ribbon for having the greatest return on assets. And my head was really spinning around is return on assets is the profit we turn to our members. in the current year or the prior year, however you're looking at it. And so really that's not fulfilling the credit union ethos, but yet we gravitate toward that. The second thing they'll tell me is, oh, Mike, we've got 15% or 15% net worth. We just have a ton of net worth. We're so safe and sound. And I think in my, well, wait a minute, net worth is the profit cumulatively that you can earn from your members over the years and not return back to them. And so having that is not necessarily better either. The goal is not to stockpile the maximum amount of net worth, but yet that's the thing that people like to share with me, what they're so proud of, the OA and the worth. And then the third thing they'll share with me is asset size. And asset size, I think, is something that is definitely meritorious toward looking toward, but I always remind people this: a tax, an asset growth tax. And what I mean is this: if a credit union is sitting on, say, for example, 10% net worth, and they owe $100 million, they're literally taxing their members another $10 million to get that $100 million in growth, because we have to maintain net worth. So it's really a hidden tax. Don't take me literally on this, but the point is this: it's more assets that are necessarily better. It's the right type of assets that we want. It's the quality of those assets. It's easy to grow the credit union by hanging a rate out there. We can bring in all the rate-sensitive funds we want. But the problem is when we grow the balance sheet, we have to take more from our members. So to me, the quality of the balance sheet, what's on it, is more important just than the size of it. And this thing that I find is quite ironic is we turn around, tie oftentimes executive compensation, and I know for a fact this, a minimum CEO review is tied to this. We pay people to take from members, and I think that's misguided because the bonus that or the evaluation criteria is tied to OA, net, and asset size, and I just demonstrated all those three things are taking from members. So I don't think that's the framework that we want to operate in. Quite frankly, I know this might sound, I'm being a little harsh on credit unions here. That's not the case. This is just what I see, and I think it's misguided. I know that most of you don't operate this way on purpose, but yet our board members sometimes who aren't quite as nuances of this industry fall into the trap. So I will avoid that trap is really what I'm saying. So I like to put it this way: your goal should not be to extract from members and hoard it away. That shouldn't be the goal. Our goal should be to create value for members and be good stewards of the product that we've taken for regulatory compliance. In other words, take only necessary. And I know in our mission statements, we probably saying and thinking these things, but we probably aren't always necessarily doing that. So that's the dilemma that I see. So what I want to do is take the challenge, if you will. Like a good movie, you've got to have something that's not right, and then you've got to figure out a way to fix it. So we develop the plot a little bit further. Let's talk about what I'll call hierarchy of member-focused priorities. Now, I'm real quickly by going over Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it basically works like this, just for those of you that might not be familiar with it. There's 6 needs that we all need as humans, and that's the bottom part or the base of the triangle. Sustained personal existence. We have safety and physiological needs, things like that, that if we don't fulfill those, we have to worry about the next need that we have up the chain well, or the higher level in terms of creating relationships, love and belonging needs, the fact that we're social people. If I have a place to sleep and food and shelter, I don't have to worry about relationships because I'm not going to live to have any. Once we have some relationships, then what do? We can fulfill our self-esteem needs by recognizing achievements, and it's really about how much potential can we maximize or get out of ourselves as human beings. So that's Maslow's hierarchy. It basically says you can't move up to the higher level into the more big need. The need right below it is satisfied. Credit union hierarchy of needs is really not much different. I think our base that we've got to satisfy is saying the entity, and that we're defined through maintaining an adequate level of net worth. If we can't keep the doors open, we can't serve others. So that's the most basic of all needs. Then the next thing I think we have an obligation is to create value for our members. That's our proposition to them through efficient use of resources. And also, we need to take care of our employees. I'm an advocate for what I would call a performance dividend employees when we're doing a good job. I don't see high-performing organizations full of below-average talent. I think in order to attract and retain talent, if we're doing the first 2 things well, we should have some employee recognition. And then the goal at the top is to do good. And really, the reason I chose the words do good, or quite frankly, those are only two words I could fit in the top triangle because it's so small, but really that's really what our mission is to get good, and that can be defined a number of ways, and we'll touch on that a little bit. This is really what I would call the credit union hierarchy of needs, and I think if we ask ourselves, this is probably the way most of us would prefer to operate. So great, Mike, that's philosophy, Mama America, apple pie. Let's talk a little bit about how we would move this into practice. So what I'm doing here on this slide is I turn the triangle upside down, take things in order from top to bottom. And the first area we're going to talk about is sustaining the entity, maintaining net worth. Then I'm going to talk for an extended time about how we create value for members through efficient use of the resources. Touch real quickly on attract and retain talent, concern for community, which is the do-good aspect, and then take only when necessary to do what? Maintain the entity. So it's almost like a cycle. We work our way down from top to bottom, and then we want to make sure that we're taking just enough ROA to sustain our entity. So if we were to break these things out into more discussion points just a little bit deeper, what are you talking about with maintaining net worth, Mike? Well, the third cooperative principle states that members are the owners, distribute to, and democratically control the capital of the cooperative. And that's great in theory. In practice, we have so many members, if you will, that have such a small slice of the net worth, sometimes that gets very diluted, but that's the ethos that we operate under. So what I would maintain is a good practice is one, set up minimum and soundness, how much net worth do you want to hold, and not mandating what that number is. That's got to be a number that's your organization. But also set a maximum to avoid hoarding. You don't want to get yourself in that situation. I'm really big into working into ranges. So that's the way I would view that. Okay, let's move into the next section, value for members. And I look at value for members as follows, if you will, the 4 P's performance. And those 4 P's are as follows. We're going to touch on each one of these. Product mix, productivity, provision, and of course I have to have some alliteration. That's why we picked the 4 P's there, but they are the truth and they fit into this very nicely. Here's the benefit to it on the right-hand side. The performance, the less risk there is in the organization. The product mix, the productivity, the handling of asset quality through provision and pricing, the stronger and less risk we're going to introduce into our organization. Organizations that are weak in these 4 areas have to take risk to survive. They're not doing something well. If you're for products, you've got to probably take risk on the asset side to generate enough income to support the fact that your product mix is so poor. Or same with productivity. If you're woefully inadequate in productivity, you have to take risk in other areas to offset that fact. So the whole point of this is to make the credit union stronger and less risk embedded in the organization rather than weaker and having to engage or reaching for return at which introduces risk. Okay, so cover the 4 P's. Let's break them down. First one's product mix. What are we trying to do with product mix, Mike? We're trying to make efficient use of net worth. Think of that net worth that you're holding on as an organization. It's capital that your members have invested into the organization. No different than capital that the stockholders would invest in a bank or that you would have invested in your retirement savings or any other organization would have invested in their operations. So what I always use that efficiently. And I don't think we should be door or secondary seats to profit organizations. Look at this. I think we should look at our way we're deploying our net worth with the same rigor. So what I would do is say, gee, I'm looking at product mix. Non-interest income doesn't require capital. There's no pull on it. My problem when I wake up every day would be to say, what are my members buying else that we provide to them that's faster, cheaper, bundled, something along those lines. If it doesn't require me to add capital or require me to take capital from the members, non-interest income is the most efficient use of that worth. I'm talking about member-friendly non-interest income, by the way, too. I'm talking about the we price things and the products, the breadth of operating and the depth of use. So I would always wake up and ask that question every day. My priority in terms of product mix would be to focus on, instead of growing assets, improving the asset mix. If I'm in a situation where maybe my relationship of surplus funds My on deposit, my overnight funds, and my investments represents about a third of the total combination of those in the loans. Then the goal should be try to grow loans at the expense of surplus funds rather than just growing the balance sheet. So be thoughtful about what I call improving asset mix. I would also focus on improving the funding mix. If my balance sheet is mainly driven from cost funding sources, money markets, IRAs, CDs, borrowings, things like that, I'd like to have more of the fund source that stays around the longest, has the lowest cost, and reprices the slowest, the one that gives me the least interest rate risk. So stable, low funding sources you're drafting your regular shares. So I'd focus on improving the mix before I grow the balance sheet, because those two items, the asset mix and the funding mix, don't require any additional net worth. Then I would ask my members to contribute more capital to the credit union when we're pushing up against our liquidity boundary, or when our strategy, a solid strategy, requires asset growth. At that point, I would do that. So all I'm trying to do with product mixes, let's be thoughtful. The thing that has the least impact on net worth are the first items, value-based non-interest income, improving the asset mix, improving the funding mix, and then only pay the asset growth tax. Liquidity is needed. Don't fall into the trap of, we just need scale, and the way I'm going to get scale is paying up for funds on my balance sheet. That's not the right way to be running things. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about productivity. And with you is what productivity is not. I see a lot of scorecards and monitoring systems and dashboards, and they have expense to asset ratio. The worst measure ever created on it. It was relevant back in the 40s and 50s. It is longer a relevant measure, because what it does is it counts all the expense associated with income generating activities, especially non-interest income generating activities, and then it ignores the income. A lot of very high performing credits that have horrible asset ratios, and what it tells me is that they've developed incomes that don't require capital. Very beneficial, which I just showed from the previous product mix. So that's the worst measure of productivity I've ever seen. It's absolutely irrelevant. If you really want to know my opinion on it, I think you get how I feel on that. I like the efficiency ratio, operating expenses, percent of net revenue. It's a financial metric. It's not a productivity metric, because it has interest rates in it. If you look at the efficiency ratio with any credibility in terms of productivity, you've got to neutralize interest rates over the same time frame. You can't let rates influence it. So from a functional measure, it's a great measure, but it's not productivity. To me, productivity is really this. It's cost effectiveness to support the highest value items. That's what productivity is. It's how cost effectively are we doing things, and where are we directing resources. And so I like to call it net operating cost, strategic balance dollar. And I'm going to tell you exactly what this is on the next slide. Allocating my resources in the most efficient manner. So ideally, my resources should be going toward supporting, because I'm an asset, I generate more return on those than I do surplus fund yield. And then what I call relationship shares. And when I say the word relationship shares, what I'm saying is draft and regular share accounts. Again, live, lowest cost, least interest rate, risk-sensitive funding source. Also, that's PFI status, Preferred Financial Institute, tells me, do I really have that core relationship? And non-interest income, because it's capital independent. I'd like to see my resources being directed at those items. Those items, by the way, represent institutional, what I call knowledge, skill, and ability. Those three things very well. I'll show you an organization that has a lot of knowledge, skill, and ability in it. You show an organization where most of their balance sheet is filled up with rate-sensitive funds. They don't have knowledge, skill, and ability. They're buying balance with rate. It takes no skill whatsoever. So that's why I would be looking at productivity in your organization. If we go next page, I want to unwind how this actually gets calculated, because I think some might be interested in this. So here I've got a credit union. Most credit unions around $1 billion in assets, give or take, operate around $40 million or so of operating expense a year. So I'm looking at the black box on the left, $40 million of operating expense. What's that supporting? On the right side, I can see $100 million in loans, $500 million in regular draft or relationship shares, and then $20 million of non-interest income. So what I do in the lower left-hand corner is I take that ratio. I say, take on my non-interest expense, back from that, the non-interest income that it threw off. So I get to a net cost figure. And I divide that by the summation of the balances that I want the most, that demonstrate knowledge, skill, and ability, loans and relationship share. So this credit union would have a 166 productivity ratio. I call it Higgins ratio because I'm a bad marketer, and it's the only thing I could think of. That's their ratio of productivity. If I were to compare that to another credit union that had a similar spend, see what I'm doing here? Not on asset size, on spend. I got another credit union that's deploying the same resources, $40 of resource, yet they hold more loan balance, more share balance of relationship shares, and generate more non-interest income, more productive than the first credit union I've highlighted on here. That definitely demonstrates knowledge, skill, and ability. That's productivity. That's what we're looking at in this industry. We'll move through the rest of the ones. This will be much more quickly. Into provision, the third P on the list of performance measures, operate within the credit standards that you decide. I'm not here to tell you what those should be. Establish a loss tolerance, depending on who you want to lend to. Say loan loss reserve multiple, how much safety net do we want to keep as a multiple of charge-offs? That's really what it gets down to. And your reserve is simply going to be charge-offs times the loan loss reserve multiple. But establish what those should look like to make sure that we're not hoarding capital away with excess loan loss reserve. And then lastly, the last P is pricing. And to me, this is the biggest economic value that we can create for our members by being able to price below market on the lending side, by able to have above market dividend rates, superior surplus funds yield, and then low prices, fees, and charges that we have for our members. That's, to me, tangible economic value created for a member, winning on the pricing side, and you can use it to create some market share. And really, these 4 Ps, as I showed you in that chart at the very beginning, value for member really is competitive advantage. So again, mix is knowledge, skill, and ability. Productivity is efficient and effective resources. Provision is managing losses within our tolerance. The better you execute upon those areas, the greater the value proposition that you can put in the marketplace, capture market share. Or back to retain talent. This is sort of a philosophical thing, but again, I think that there needs to be some recognition of in our organization. I think that it's no different than paying the dividend to my members. I don't see why I can't pay a little bit of dividend to our staff when we're successful, when we can afford to. Because I'll tell you what, that'll create a competitive advantage to attract and retain talent. If you can pay above market, you're going to get the best talent in your organization. Also other factors, you want to have a competitive compensation and benefits package and career and personal development plans. And then concern for community, again, kind of a nebulous topic, but it's specific in what we're trying to do. We're trying to do something good. So, remember, give back, supplemental dividend, community outreach, funding a foundation, doing something good. There's a lot we can do good community. And then last box, the optimal ROA, taking only what is necessary. This can be driven down to actually a mathematical equation. Because if I'm not taking enough ROA, my net worth is going to deteriorate. If I'm taking too much, I'm hoarding net worth. Help me find that zone. Remember I talked earlier, I like to operate in ranges. What's a minimum ROA and an optimal ROA I'd like to operate within? Minimum ROA is pretty simple to calculate. It's simple. What's your desired rate of asset growth from your strategic plan? You multiply that times your target net worth percentage. There's your minimum ROA. Our goal is to grow 10% a year in assets, and we want to have 10% net worth. 10 times 10 is 1% ROA. You've got to have that, or otherwise your net worth will deteriorate. And then I add a little safety margin on that, maybe 5, 10, 15 basis points to be your high end. I'd call that the optimal ROA. So we really want to operate in that zone. That's the key. All right, now let's start to put this together because, again, I've talked very broad philosophy. I've started to narrow it down by talking about how we can define that. I'm using words. Now we're going to get into formula. And really, the optimal ROA is driven by the things I've just discussed, the parts that make up this triangle. So we can literally quantify this hierarchy. What's the right ROA we want to take, and then how much asset growth is that going to support? Will that support our strategic objective? Let's talk about this focus framework. We'll start getting now very specific. So really what I'm sharing with you is a scorecard, dashboard, measurement system. I don't care what you want to call it. The point is these are the de facto levers that determine your financial success as an organization. This is not for debate. Now, I'll stress this is your enterprise risk model, not that. This is meant to be a tool that says finally, what are the levers that we can influence as an organization, and what my board be aware of as well, too, to understand if we're going to be financially viable. So you can see on the very far left-hand side, that's the triangle turned upside down: sustain the entity, create value for members, recognize employees, do good, optimal ROA. Measures that filled out are the items I just got done covering with you. So those are the things that we're going to measure. And what it is, it provides us a consistent set of measures that allows us to do a number of things. I'm going to touch on these very quickly. Evaluating where we stand right now, how do we perform against peer. We can use it to set up some governance or mitigation values. You can use it for planning, and it's great for lively debate. The neat thing about this set of measures is it's robust, yet it's full, because it captures everything, but there's no double counting. See, again, a lot of dashboards, we're measuring the same thing 4 different ways, and then we're forgetting 3 other things. So that's the challenge that I see. All right, so I'm filling out, if you will, this scorecard or template or spreadsheet or whatever you want to call it. I want to know where I'm at right now, and I like to think in terms of what's called forward run rate. Where I'm at now, not last year, is irrelevant because that's water under the bridge. What your net interest margin or rates for last year, irrelevant. Or right now, that's what matters. So you fill all this stuff in, and the nice thing is because all these values combined are income, you can see what your ROA would be and how much growth that would support. So start by where you're at now. That's a very important thing to understand. And also, where you're at now, you need to scrub out noise. If you have some one-time items, need to be pulled out of here. Anything that's non-recurring has absolutely got to be scrubbed out. Otherwise, you're just lying to yourself. To lay numbers next to it from a peer perspective, to say, hey, find me some other credit unions that are operating at the same expense level. I don't like asset peer. I like expense peer because that's what we're spending on operations. That's the question. If I was a member, I'd be asking, I don't care about asset size. What are we spending each year, and what am I getting for it? Line up an expense peer against that just to provide me with some perspective. From a governance perspective or board management perspective, or not really senior management, what are the worst values that I can have on these numbers? What's the thing that I'm going to allow to happen? And the nice thing is, because all these measures combined together are income and return on assets. The beautiful thing is, if you set boundaries on each one of those items, the worst thing that's going to happen is the ROA that spits out. That is very reassuring, because again, it's dashboards that aren't thoughtful. So you use those as values, and you say if our performance is over on the bad side of one of these areas, then we have to have some questions answered. You can use the same type of concepts. Where would we like to be at some point in time in the year? 1, 3, 4, 5 years out in the future, whatever your planning horizon is. Think about what you'd like to get to in terms of creating value for your members and so forth and so on, and then backfill the numbers to where you're at. And you've got a plan for going forward, at least financial strategic plan, one that makes sense. At the end of the day, all strategic plans are worthless if they don't make financial sense. At some point, you've got to intersect them with some tests. So when you do this, if you were to take a look at net worth, again, in this example, I'm just saying, hey, we built a plan out, and we see our net worth increasing over the course of these 5 years, then we're taking too much from our members. That's really easy to fix it by doing good. We either some of it back to our self, or we do it through community outreach or community giving. So that's the beautiful thing about having a model like this, is we can literally apply numbers to this. Here's a live example of one credit union. Again, you can see on the left-hand side, we have type of categories: capital, how much net worth do we want to hold, what I call consumption, what's our spending rate, and what's our loss rate, because I need knowledge, skill, and ability moving down the left-hand side to be able to offset my rate of consumption, what I'm going to do on pricing, and how much do good can I do. And so this organization loaded their numbers up and have a situation where their net worth is increasing significantly over the next 5 years. And what we're able to demonstrate to them is, hey, if you'd like to some element of do good in the bottom there, you could cough about 35% of your profit each year and use that to do something good with it and give it back to your members, give it to your employees, put it out in the community. But boy, that's really exciting. And I think that creates something that you can get charged up about. We want to perform at a very high level on slide 45. 46, we get to do fun stuff in the community. I think that engages people in the numbers and gives them a reason to understand what what these numbers are and how it can impact them, because the better we perform, the more we get to do. All right, let's run through a quick case study. I'll share a couple of credit examples, then I'll wrap things up. We'll probably wrap up here in the next 7 to 8 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. So the first thing I prefer to do, I kind of let the cat out of the bag earlier, is I'm going to look at my peer group in terms of expense, the spend. What are we getting from an investment in operation? So in this example, we have selected a credit union, and we are doing it based upon their spend. Over the past 4 quarters, you can see a 3-year trend here as I'm showing, but over the past 4 quarters, they spent about $45 million. We were able to find 40 credit unions that had a community charter that spent about that same amount, plus or minus 12%. So that's a great tight peer group, and that excludes provision, any extraordinary items. Well, it's operating expenses, what's resources are at their disposal. The challenge with doing asset-based peers is if you did distribution, the distribution is always clustered on the small end. Here we don't. This community is going to be in the middle. Half of them are going to be bigger, half of them are going to be smaller. That's called a peer right there, not clustering them all small end of the distribution scale. Okay, so we've got this tool called member value assessment. So now I'm really getting into the finite items of this. On the left-hand side, you're going to the areas we talked about: productivity, product, pricing, and provision. Now, the peer group is based upon the spend, so we're not going to see a lot of difference between how the peer is performing versus the credit union. So on the right-hand side of the chart, you'll see it says member value chart, value opportunity in red, value created in black ink at the top there. The bars will actually be blue. What does it tells me from an expense perspective? Am I spending more or less than the peer group? And this credit union spends a teeny bit more because the credit union is based upon expense, so we're not going to see a lot of difference, but I count that. It spends a little bit more, a little bit less. We're going to look at that. So that's our spend. Let's go look at the tech mix and the productivity that the union is throwing off. For the spend along the side, they hold $56 million more loan balance on their balance sheet and monetize exactly what that's worth $10 million or 63 basis points ROA. How do I know that? They had $356 million less in loans and foreign investments. I know the difference between what their investment portfolio yields and what loan yield generates. And that additional balance that they have earning the higher yield is worth $10 million. I mean, this is up for debate. That's his hard bottom line right there. So that's value created. They do a great job there. They hold a little bit more relationship share balance. So again, I can monetize that. And they generate a little bit more in non-interest income as well, too. Remember, I'm benchmarking against other credit unions, not banks. So interest income, I'm assuming, is friendly for the most part. So same spend, they're generating 81 basis points greater top line. Their net revenue or top line ROA before any operating costs are applied is 81 basis points higher than the peer group because they're taking the same resource and doing more with it. Now let's see what they're doing on the pricing side. Loan yield. Members are paying 67 basis points less than the peer group. Well, that's benefit. Exactly how to monetize that. Do I understand that the loan yield can be affected by the type of lending? Absolutely. But at the same point, it's virtuous to take as little members in yield. Their dividend rate's a little bit higher. Their plus fund yield stinks, and it should, because all of the assets are being loaned out. They don't have anything less or left over to generate any rate of return on it. It's all earning the overnight yield. And their charge-offs, they charge off a little bit less than the peer group, so which is really remarkable on 30% more loan balance. From an operational perspective, this credit union gets graded very highly, very high. They're 90th percentile performer in peer group because they're taking the same resources and creating value in terms of productivity and product mix and pricing and managing provision. The thing I like to look at is member investment in the credit union, and that's really loan loss reserve. Loan loss reserve is capital. It's out capital for losses. That's all it is. It's net worth earmarked for losses, and then net worth. And again, this credit union is able to satisfactorily operate at with less net worth. So that's money that's sitting in the members' pockets and less on the balance sheet. As a matter of fact, that's about $42 million that is in the pocket. So put yourself in a boardroom. and you're the senior management team and you're presenting this to your board, very case, we are doing the right things, we're operating in a very virtuous manner, and we can demonstrate that against a peer group who makes similar investment in operations. This is the type of credit where the board's going to give them a standing ovation. It's outstanding. So contrast that against a high ROA, high net worth credit. Is that necessarily good for members? Here's, again, I redacted their name because I want to protect the innocent here, if you will. Operates at a very high level of ROAs, operated between about 140 and 190 over the past years. So let's go see how they're doing. So SEN, as the peer group, because it's one out of the same peer group, same spend, they have a different business model. Okay, they have less loan balance, and they generate more non-interest income. The problem with that, people can make money different ways. It just highlights the differences of where the income comes from. Maybe they're a big mortgage shop where they originate and sell. That could be what is, and there's nothing wrong with that business model. So they generate a little bit less top-line ROA, but they're not too far off the group, so that's defendable. Here's the part that's not defendable. Getting more loan yield for members. Again, I understand the subtleties and the nuances of who you're lending to, but when I crash that against their losses, it's going to be hard to justify the higher yield. Because really, you look at the loan yield in a net position. Loan for charge-offs. They'll say, well, we do but risk-based lending. Yeah, you do, but you're still charging your members too much because your losses aren't elevated enough to justify the extra 117 basis points you're taking. Could they be cheating against interest rate risk? Absolutely. Some of it could be that. And again, that's why this creates debate, discussion about why are you doing this way and is that justifiable? They have a ton of liquidity, yet they pay less in dividends, 26 basis points less in dividends as I'm working on the left-hand side. They have a ton of liquidity and their surplus funds yield is below average. That's not acceptable. So they are okay on the tech mix and productivity side, but they're taking money on the side. And they're taking money despite charge-offs are not that much higher than the peer group. In terms of member investment, they're hoarding capital. They're sitting on $13.6 of net worth, and they're sitting on a big, fat loan reserve. So they've got a ton of liquidity, not a lot of risk on the balance sheet, and they're sitting on way too much capital. So I would not score this credit union as member-friendly, or, if you will, so you got some explaining to do, Lucy. We need to understand why this is, and we need some justifications. Again, this would be a tough one to defend. They're on the other end of the spectrum. So recap, open up for questions and discussion. As a credit union, we have this dual mandate. We need to provide benefit to members, but at the same time, we need to stay adequately. Where do I operate on this spectrum? That's the challenge that we face as credit unions. We think about this from a philosophical perspective. There's a hierarchy or prioritization. And I think that's the challenge we have too much in our planning is we don't prioritize things very well. So we can set up a prioritization as well. We can quantify and measure this stuff with absolute precision and use it as a guiding set of numbers that we can drive toward to defend how we're performing as an organization. And again, I think the merits or the virtues of a member-focused organization is they have a guiding philosophy, probably like the hierarchy that I shared with you, something along those lines. I'm able to measure our success using de facto member value drivers, the measures I showed you. We can develop a plan, or at least a financial plan, if you will, that focus on creating value for members, and we can test that against strategy to make sure the two intersect. We can validate it against peer. We have a process to do the most good, if you will, and then brag about it. Because at the end of the day, we want to create a virtuous cycle that says we take resources, we deploy them effectively, efficiently, we create value for members, and we're able to demonstrate that back to the community at large and to the board of directors as well, too. So I pause at this point. I appreciate your attention so far and letting me tell the entire story. Let's hop in with questions, and I'll get a little sip of water.
We can consider it would certainly be valuable. It's just a matter of the valuable. Yes.
And Mike, thank you.
You're welcome.
All the participants at this time, please note you've all been unmuted. And I have started receiving some questions on the chat already. So I'm for everybody there who want to ask. Then we'll go to the questions that came via chat. If you're not able to hear me or you're not will talk to send me a message.
You should have it.
Here, there, I believe, in the slide 44, Edgar had sent a question. He was asking, how does a credit union balance with demands from examiners and auditors, or more focus on making sure FCU fits within their framework?
The FCU on her card.
Yeah. So the question was, how would a credit union balance this? You know, if you will, satisfying many different simultaneous requirements. And so that question is, again, what I'm going to stress is this is not your enterprise risk model. You've got to have other elements you're considering. But that said, this is a perfect example between slides 43 and 44. This is an example of a credit union that can perform very strongly before it does any type of recognize employees or do good. If you can perform at a level that's throwing off an ROA that is growing your net worth, you are in a position where you have options and alternatives. Because you can take that excess of profitability on slide 44 and do with it what you want. And that's just a wonderful position to be in.
My picture is way down below.
Yeah, so I'd answer that question is if you can operate in that manner. If you're operating in a manner where the net worth is declining each year, that's kind of obvious. You're going to struggle. But that should also spot it, debate as to how we're going to reverse that situation.
Second one.
Yeah, hopefully that answered that question.
Okay, Mike, and if you're still there, any follow-up on that? And I'm going to read out another question, and I request while Mike is answering, if you can mute yourself, so then it is very less distraction. So, Mike, one of the questions came up here. We talked about the 4 P's of performance: product, mix, activity, provision, price. And we were actually comparing, different credit unions. My question is, based on this session, is way with this assessment when we think about introducing a new product?
Like, good question.
Do our members even need this product? How do we go about making a call on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question, and that's probably a question that could span a very long time in discussion. But let me try to touch on that. First of all, I guess some of the things I'd say if we're evaluating a new product is, the obvious question is something that our members would use, or are they demonstrating the need for, are they communicating? Those are the kind of the obvious philosophical questions on that. But then what caused me to ask some questions like, does this new product require a pull on capital? And how do we feel about that? For instance, if we said, hey, we're going to come out with this new high-yield CD product, it might not be the one that's the most favorable. But again, maybe that's something that we want to do, and you might have your reasons, by the way. But I think what you could just think about it in asking the questions and how would it affect our mix, our use of capital, our productivity? Will it create unnecessary provision needs on us? And then we're going to price it. So, it's a good question. I don't know that I can answer it in specific terms, maybe without a little more clarity, but that's how I'd look at it.
See, that was quite a loaded question. And I know once we have a product out, once we have those numbers, rather is easier for you to compare, at least, various measures. And also, personally learned something, Higgins ratio thing. And at this time, we 10 more minutes. Any other call here? Any other participants?
Hi, this is Greg Noller. This is Greg Noller again. Sorry for the background noise, but I'm just wondering, will you guys post a recording of this and also the slides? I thought it was a great presentation.
This is my thing.
I appreciate it. Yeah, from what I understand, this recording is being recorded, and I'd be happy to make slides available too. So, answer at least from my end would be yes on that.
Yeah. So what you can do, the PDF you can share with me, and I'll make sure I post them. Typically, I get them before the presentation. In this case, I fell off my radar. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. So. Yes, great. To answer your question, yeah, we'll try to post the presentation PDF. And let's see, the question, this is a little, do profit taken after compliance? The good is, so what I'm going to ask, there was a question which was not that straightforward to me, so I'm going to ask them to you, Mike, directly. Okay.
Okay.
And at this time, we'll keep another minutes if anybody has a question, a follow-up question. And really, I want to thank Mike for this opportunity from him.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone that logged in to listen for 40 minutes. Thank you for suffering through that. I hope it was somewhat enlightening, or at least you gleaned a couple things out of it. Again, what we're really trying to do is say, hey, we have distinct advantage in the marketplace. How can we demonstrate that we're living up to that and prove that? And I think that I've found in the companies that I've worked with this is it galvanizes the team and the board and actually the staff together, because it says, hey, we have this common vision and we can quantify with some level of detail what that actually looks like. Sometimes it's just nebulous, better service, better products, words that are very descriptive, but they're more adjectives. This provides a way to actually quantify some of that, and I think that's kind of how it fits into, if you will, the Ulytics, although at a little more maybe a strategic or less data analysis level.
What?
Okay. Thank you once again. It was a very useful presentation. A lot of material to digest. Once we see your this PDF presentation along with the recordings, those of us who have follow-up questions, reach out to you directly and also write to me. He's available at the culytics.com. You can go to the. And thanks again. And then I'll be sending out the next month's webinar soon. And so we'll conclude this. Thanks a lot for everybody's participation.
Now, and when I get done, I'll fire over the PDF deck to you.
Bye.
All right, everyone. Bye-bye.